You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
It's great to be back alongside you, Eugene. I know I've got a bit of a different look happening. It's because we're upgrading the dispatches look. So stay tuned, you guys. This is just a temporary solution while we wait for the upgrade. So bear with us.
I think they will bear with you. I think you should have created more of a legend to that, though. Like you're in an undisclosed location due to something.
Yeah, I didn't say where I was. I didn't say I am in an undisclosed location. No one knows where. No one recognizes
from the way
what's
you
behind
said that,
me.
but okay. Either way,
no one knows where I am. I could be anywhere. I could be the same. I could be next to you. I could be in the other room, in the same building as you, Eugene.
You could be. You could be.
I don't know why I would do that, but you know what? I don't need to give answers to anybody.
That's true. You don't know anyone anything. But what I will say is, if you are watching on YouTube and you thought that was just a great back and forth, well, there's more of that out there. So it's a good opportunity for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to, so you can get all the whimsical banter between Rania and myself, as well as the very serious content we're putting out on a range of different issues from a range of different people on a regular basis. You don't want to have to work too hard to find it. So hit the bell so you get the alerts for the thing you subscribe to. And if you're watching on Free Speech TV, just keep on watching. And as always, big shout out to the FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear to you on that platform. So please keep supporting them as well. Rania, anything else you would like to relay to our viewers?
Yes, I want to remind people that we are an independent media outlet. And as a result, we depend on the support of our listeners, our viewers, those of you in the audience. So if you support Breakthrough News and all of the incredible work we do here, if I do say so myself, please go to patreon.com/breakthrough news, where for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you'll be helping to support an independent media outlet that brings you voices from all around the world who are often ignored by the mainstream media, which is funded by a bunch of weapons companies to try to drive us to war constantly.
Yeah, bleak but true. No doubt about that. And if they're not funded by weapons companies, they're funded by the companies that are helping all these other terrible entities. You know, of course, Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, getting married this weekend to many, many protests there in Venice. But what you don't know is that many people don't know Amazon Web Services has hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts with the CIA to manage their cloud storage. But when they write about the CIA in the Washington Post, Rania, they don't say anything about that. So I thought they were all about conflict of interest and, you know, being even-handed, but you don't know about the hidden hand there of the CIA enriching the owner, Jeff Bezos, who says only free market ideas can be in the opinion section. So yes, definitely, please, we appreciate all your patronage. For those of you who've already become patrons too, as well, it's done a lot to get us where we are so far, and I think we've got a lot more exciting things coming up for you. So
definitely. But wait, Eugene, wait. I just want to also remind people to smash the like button. Sure. At the very least. Look, if you can't do $5 a month, exactly. If you can't do $5 a month, or if you already are doing $5 a month, or even more, but you feel like you could do more, one of those things you could do is smash the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. And make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News. Make sure you hit that bell icon so that you can get alerts whenever we have new content go up. And yes, patreon.com/breakthrough news. And I'm going to come up with another way to say it next week, like I always do.
Yeah, well, you do a great job.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, let's get right into it here. You know, obviously the recent issue with the sort of U.S., Israel versus Iran war and bombings that have been taken on. There's so many different angles, so many different aspects to this that involve the overall West Asian, Central Asian region. And we are very, very honored to be joined on the show to keep diving into this by Obaidullah Bahir, who is a PhD scholar at the New School and also an adjunct lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan. Obaidullah, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Eugene and Rania.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us. And I mean, there's so much we could talk about here, but one thing I just wanted to just get your thoughts on when I just am reflecting on what we've just seen, and are continuing to see vis-a-vis Iran is some of the framing of it, the idea that bombings and sanctions and occupations are somehow the right way or the best way or the most effective way to quote unquote bring change, however that's looked at, freedom, democracy, all those different things to a country. And, I'm old enough to remember that was the Afghan story as well. If we just destroy the country, somehow everything will be great. So I just wonder what you think, and I'm partially asking you this because you had a tweet I really liked when you said, make America do the same thing over and over and over again, that I think speaks so much to this logic that's so accepted here in the United States, but seems so flawed.
First off, I really hope Rania is never hunted by the Israelis, because I think she tweeted her location yesterday. So if she's trying to hide it, she's not doing a really good job. Beyond that, I mean, this is a script that has been overplayed, right? This is a story we've seen in the past few decades. It's always regime change. We saw what that led to in Libya. It was bombing us to liberation in Afghanistan. It was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And the same script is replayed again. They keep telling you that the regime is extremely unpopular in Iran. The thing is, we don't have data. They refer to polls that have had 100,000 people join online and poll that they don't really like the regime. Do you know what the population of Iran is? 100 million, right? That makes 0.1% of the population. I'm pretty sure 0.1% of me doesn't like me, right? I mean, that's not really numbers to work with. But ultimately, it's not about that. It's about empire. It's about power. It's about the dual state that the world exists in. There is a different law for us and a different law for the West, right? It has always been like this. They've even created new vocabulary. Apparently, when Israel drops bombs, they're peaceful bombs. When Israel aggresses its self-defense, somehow hitting nuclear reactors is fine, and it's stuff like that sort of makes us lose faith in international justice and international law. They do these things to us and they wonder why Muslim youth become radicalized. They've been pushed to the corner. We have a saying in my language. It says, I'll beat you, but you're not allowed to cry. So the moment we react, we are the radicals. We are the people who are out of the bounds of international law and deserve whatever punishment comes towards us.
Obaidullah, you're based in Afghanistan, and you and I spoke on Dispatches. You were actually one of my first guests when I started that show, because it was just as Biden was pulling out U.S. troops from Afghanistan. And I raised that because, when we think about all of the rhetoric and the entire lexicon that we hear the Israelis use when it comes to Gaza, that we've heard the U.S. use when it comes to Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, the first victim of the U.S. war on terror was Afghanistan. So I guess I'm curious, as you've watched this unfolding genocide in Gaza, how does the Afghan experience help us understand what's at stake for countries like Iran, for Palestine, for Syria, for Yemen, when Washington and the Israelis escalate these military aggressive activities, either when it comes to the military or even economically?
One thing that we've learned is that there is no justice, right? Ultimately, they come, they do whatever they want to, and they leave. Rania, the stories of the crimes committed in Afghanistan could fill up books. They had CIA-trained units that would drag you outside your house and shoot you at bullet point in front of your family at night. These are documented crimes, the crimes of UK forces, German forces, Australian forces. All of them are out there, and that's not even a fraction. When they're leaving the Abbey Gate bombing at the airport, the US soldiers turn their guns on Afghans and shoot hundreds there. They bombed an innocent family as the last act of retribution before they left, and ultimately admitted that they were innocents. This is a story of 20 years, but then imagine Israel and Palestine, which was a taboo topic. Rania, growing up, I grew up around the consequences of the Palestinian occupation and their displacement. Abdullah Azzam, the leader of the Arab Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who trained bin Laden and took him under his wing, was a Palestinian who was displaced from his home in Palestine. Ultimately, they're the reasons why a lot of these people were radicalized. You saw how viral bin Laden's open letter went after the genocide in Gaza started, just to show you that Muslims were aching from this for a very long time. You know, unlike the West, we don't see each other as nations. The nation state for us is a very, very new thing. There is an ummah, there is an Islamic community where one side hurts, and ultimately Palestine being a sacred area for Muslims means that this has been a thorn in our sides for decades, and ultimately we weren't allowed to speak about it, because the moment you were allowed to take courses in liberal studies about displacement, about settler colonialism, but all of that was hushed up and you couldn't name the country where it was actively happening, right? At least the mosques have fallen off. Yes, at a great cost. Yes, at great suffering, but at least we're talking about it. But Rania, it's not enough. I mean, imagine if their skin tones were different. Imagine if they believed in a different religion. The world would have been an outrage. People would have brought their governments down, but somehow the max we see are a few protests. These are democratic countries that have popular politics that can be used to pressurize politicians. However, nothing is changing. The United States continues to arm them. The UK continues to arm them. The European Union keeps patting them on the back. The world saw the Holocaust and said we were never going to allow it to happen again. Why is it now being live streamed as a genocide and the world just watches indifferently? Peter Singer says, if you walked by a pond and saw a drowning child, would you not save their lives? And ultimately, he builds it up to a point where you can see children drowning and dying of hunger. Why don't you help them? Here, there's a live genocide. 100 people a day are dying, innocents, and yet no one bats an eye, and there is no change in policies.
You know, I think, and certainly when we look at what happened in Ukraine, I think your point about the skin tone and the eye color is very well taken. And, you know, I want to ask you about a related issue here, and that is, you know, some of the ongoing moves in Congress to cut off well, I don't even know. They're calling it no tax dollars to terrorists, these different things that are allegedly to prevent money from, you know, going to the Taliban in Afghanistan, but really a form of sanctions as I see it and as I read it. And the impact of this on Afghanistan, because I feel like this is a big part of the conversation that has happened since, as Rania mentioned, Biden has affected this pullout, is this idea that, you know, there should be no aid, there should almost like a blockade on the country. And then you have sort of the related issues coming from war and sanctions of refugees and neighboring countries. It all feels sort of a piece here. But I was wondering if you could talk about that a bit, because I think in the United States, there's, well, one, I think people are just not paying attention to a large degree to what's happening in Afghanistan, but there's still so much grandstanding being done by those in Congress.
Look, I'm happy that no one in the United States is talking about Afghanistan. Every time you guys talk about it, problem for us, right? So might just as well ignore us. You know, we'll be in our corner of the world, try to figure stuff out. But ultimately, there is an obsession with foreign messiahs, right? That they have to land, they have to save us. Somehow we're incapable of saving ourselves. That's latent Orientalism. The problem is, it doesn't matter how many buildings I build, you will still, not you, but the West will see us as uncivilized. They will see us as subhuman, which is why our deaths don't matter, which is why there is a hierarchy of death where our numbers really don't mean much. But somehow a war in Ukraine, which we are now desensitized to as Muslims because we see that our deaths don't matter, why should we care about the West's wars, right? But ultimately, the thing about the stopping money going to the Taliban, it's all a farce. You know, these are people whose egos and legacies are associated with Afghanistan, who somehow want to appear like they did not lose the war after 20 years. They'd stopped aid to Afghanistan months ago. Days after Trump came to power, all funding to Afghanistan stopped, right? So all of this sitting in Congress and patting their own backs, saying that they've stopped money for Afghanistan is nothing but popular politics or populism, trying to show their people that they're supposedly hard on the Taliban. There are understandings for security with the Taliban going on as we speak. So ultimately, the problem is Afghans will pay the price. They broke it. They're refusing to own it. They're refusing to let our federal reserves get back to Afghanistan. Yes, Afghanistan is not great. Yes, we have probably one of the most difficult patches in our history, but at least it's us trying to figure it out, right? The West tried, or the United States and its allies tried to, for 20 years, brought us back to point zero, right? What's that meme saying? If you feel useless, think about how the United States spent 20 years and a few $1 trillion only to bring the Taliban back to power, right? So ultimately, we have our fate in our hands. It's not great. We have huge problems with human rights, but we'll build it. The problem is they're choking us. They're making sure that the common person pays the price, right? Lack of aid, economic sanctions, these bring people closer to the regime. Coming back to the Iran thing, if they think that by bombing the regime, they can get the people to stand up against it, they're bringing the people closer to the regime, because the one thing that unites them is their hatred for Israel and its crimes, right? So when Israel is the one bombing them, they don't care if Satan himself is ruling them. They will stand by that regime, right? So ultimately, the whole regime change logic is faulty as well. They had an agreement with the Taliban in Doha. The United States withdrew. The Taliban gave them protection at the airport as their troops left, barring that one bombing that happened at the airport. It was a very successful withdrawal. But ultimately, now is the time to accept the fact that the war has ended. The Taliban have won. Let Afghans cater to their own issues. But we can only do that if we're not starving, if our taps aren't shut off. We need some aid to get back on our feet after 20 years of conflict, and they're refusing to do that for us, all based on their politics.
It truly is monstrous given what the U.S. has done to Afghanistan to continue to strangle it. And it is amazing how you see the same faces, the same people, like you mentioned, all that impunity. They're always the same ones making the argument that, you can bomb people into loving you. But, I want to ask you, in terms of the general sentiment in Afghanistan, Afghanistan shares a massive border with Iran. And I think the entire world had, it was a bit of whiplash. For us here in Lebanon, it was at least, to watch this insane 12-day back and forth war between the Israelis and the Iranians play out. So I'm just curious, how was Afghan media covering it? What was the general sentiment on the street? Because, if a country next door has a war, people tend to have an opinion about it.
Funny thing is, just to show you how odd the times are that we live in, Afghanistan has been the most sane country diplomatically in the region in the past few weeks. The fact that they played a very balanced role between India and Pakistan, and now during the Iranian conflict as well, they weren't too crazy about it, but they issued condemnations. Ultimately, there have been a lot of protests here and demonstrations in favor and solidarity of the Palestinians. But you have to understand that there's always a cost of war. There's always spillover. Since the fighting in Iran started, Iran has tripled the refugee expulsion from their country. We are now dealing with a crisis where Pakistan had already promised to expel millions of Afghans. Now the Iranians are doing it at a larger number than Pakistan is, right? So that just creates further economic difficulties for us. We have to cater to these refugees, get them back, get them resettled. And it's not an easy task, especially considering where our economy is and how turbulent the times are. But look, Iran hasn't been a great neighbor to a lot of people, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean we wish war upon it. That doesn't mean we want the United States to violate its aerial sovereignty or push for regime change. If the Iranians don't like their regime, I personally really have a lot to say about the Iranian regime and how they treat Afghan refugees. They've been treated horribly. I've had people whose organs have been harvested, Rania, moved back, their corpses moved back to their families in Afghanistan, right? And this is not a one-off thing. Dead bodies are being moved across the border even now as we speak. So that just breaks your heart. I mean, the fact that, and ultimately, this has a longer history. It's not just us. We're not horrible people. Our circumstances have been created for us. We were prosperous nations until colonialism happened, until it refuses to unhappen. And this whole neoliberal regime that works against us all the time has brought us where it's brought us, right? I've already discussed how radicalism has worked, how Islamic fundamentalism has thrived. I know it because I've experienced it. I grew up to watching these videos of atrocities, and I know what it did to me, right? It took a lot out of me to not go down that path, but ultimately I understand when people go down it. And these things, these actions, these policies don't help. And yes, I wish we were better neighbors. I wish circumstances were better, but unfortunately, that sort of camaraderie only works in the West. One last thing, though, which is really interesting, is with regards to the US, right? And especially Trump, because the title today was like his losing streak. I just couldn't help but think of Slavoj Žižek's quote where he says, maybe it's about time that a few million ignoramuses don't decide the fate of the world. Right? No offense, but ultimately, it just talks about how the US empire, with all of the responsibility that that privilege and that power incurs, has not been a responsible hegemon. Hegemonic stability theory had to mean that that hegemon was going to be the archetype and the protector of international law and justice and all have you. But the United States has been the exception to the rule for decades. And it's about time, probably, that Trump is the retribution. Trump is the fall of the US empire on steroids. And maybe we're better off.
Well, look, no offense taken. I'm also asking the same question of how we can get fewer ignoramuses running things on all sides of things. Listen, we really appreciate you on a number of different fronts here, a lot to look into, and we appreciate you helping us sort through it. Obaidullah Bahir, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Eugene, that was fantastic to hear from Obaidullah, especially just to get the view from Afghanistan, or at least a view from Afghanistan. And I love that quote to end on. Really beautiful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, this is breakthrough news. Another reason you should donate to us, because we're bringing you perspectives from everywhere, from, Kabul to Kansas City. We are going to keep moving forward here. Very important issue. We've talked about the role of Maersk several times here on the show as a key link in the chain of the broader genocidal campaigns of Israel. There have been some important updates, I guess you could say, in the context of what's going on there. And so we are very happy to be joined on the show by Lea Kayali, who is an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement and their Mask Off Maersk campaign. Lea, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Eugene. Hi, Rania. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh, I can hear her.
Oh, am I muted?
Eugene just I think Eugene's earphones aren't working.
They're telling me I'm good now. Lea, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, I can definitely hear you all right. I think I was being sabotaged by the production team here at Breakthrough News.
Wow.
I'm just being honest. That's what took place. Either way, it's an honor to have you here. And I let's just start here with Maersk's recent decision. You explained it to us, because they were saying that they were divesting from, involvement in Israel in some way, shape, or form, obviously under the pressure that the Mask Off Maersk campaign has been putting on the company. So give us a sense of what they said and what they claim they're doing and how that impacts their broader complicity.
Yeah, so what we've seen in the last week is a really tremendous milestone in our campaign. Certainly not a total victory, and I'll get to that, but we have seen a really historic moment in the entire logistics industry, which is that after months of relentless campaigning against Maersk, that our organization, the Palestinian Youth Movement, has been leading along with comrades around the world. We've seen that Maersk has actually decided to end businesses with companies linked to Israeli settlements in the 67 Palestinian territories. So think like the West Bank. And I say that specifically because they haven't divested from all of the Zionist entity, and we know that the entire project is itself an illegal settlement from a Palestinian perspective. But that being said, I think the fact that they have decided to withdraw their relationships with companies that are operating in illegal settlements is a really significant milestone and an indication that they're feeling the heat from our campaign. Prior to them making this decision, we did release in January of this year a report that was really exposing how entangled they were with the settlement project. And I'm sure your viewers are probably familiar, but the settlement project, particularly in the West Bank, while not nearly, deserving comparison to the scale of grotesque violence and genocide we're seeing in Gaza, is also really the frontier of Zionist expansionism on Palestinian territory. So the fact that Maersk was deeply embedded in this system of land grabs and expansion through their business with companies and settlements was really one core part of their complicity in the genocide against the Palestinian people. So the fact that they have withdrawn those relationships shows that they're feeling some of the heat that our campaign is putting to them. That being said, we really do need to keep sort of our eyes on the ball here when it comes to their complicity with the genocide and particularly the weapons sales. Maersk is still participating in sending weapons components and military cargo to the Zionist entity for them to be able to not only commit a genocide in Gaza, but to be able to expand this war across the whole region, as we've seen recently in their completely illegal attacks on Iran. So until Maersk completely divests from their involvement with the Department of Defense, with the Israeli military, we are going to continue to be pressuring them, but we definitely take it as a sign of our power that they have pulled back this relationship with all of the settlement companies.
No, I think it's incredible what you all have been able to accomplish. And of course, as you said, it's not, the end. You're still going to go for bigger. But, I think this is also part of a larger movement to end this kind of corporate complicity and genocide. So I'm curious if you could talk a bit about how Maersk fits into the global supply chain that fuels Israel's war crimes, because it's one of many companies that's involved.
That's right. I mean, Maersk is one of the largest companies in the world and the second largest shippings and logistics company. And so that's actually part of the reason, Rania, that we decided to target them, is they're an industry lead when it comes to really the arteries of imperialism. All of these companies, often headquartered in NATO allied countries, that are participating in whether it's the US's forever wars in the Middle East, Israel's continuing genocide on Palestine and the greater region. These shipping and logistics companies are playing a really core role, and Maersk is one of the industry leads in them. So what I think that means for the sort of broader imperialist and capitalist system is that when we see a company like Maersk, withdraw from the settlements, it means that others are going to follow. And that's why it's so important for us to keep up the pressure for them to withdraw their total involvement in the Zionist entity, in the project of militarism being used against our people, and hope that other companies are going to follow suit.
One of the things I was just hoping you could talk about here, because I think the point you're making about the pressure they were feeling is so significant, is what has been happening with the Maersk Off Maersk campaign, because it's been a wide range of activity on a number of different levels, and as you pointed out, across a number of different countries. And I think, that deserves to also be highlighted as well.
Yeah, I mean, what we have seen with this campaign is that our power as people is our connection to one another and the mass nature of our movement. So, we as the Palestinian Youth Movement have taken up particular local campaigns and actions in places where we have folks on the ground. But what we've also seen is that we've been able to make connections with folks, dock workers in France, people doing street organizing in Morocco. Really, the Maersk Off Maersk campaign has become totally global. Organizers in the Netherlands, as recently as yesterday, have been taking really dramatic and inspiring action against the companies that are providing weapons to Israel, including Maersk. And so what we've seen is, we're both the movement has become global in relation to this campaign, and I think in relation to the broader, Palestinian liberation and anti-imperialist movements around the world, and also the spectrum of people who are invested in seeing Maersk drop these connections is really quite wide. We've seen folks who, are organizers and activists who are already tapped into movement that are feeling inspired to take action against Maersk. But we've also seen everyday folks who, work at these docks where Maersk is shipping weapons components through, decide to take, the moral and courageous stand to walk off the job or to organize through their union to refuse to participate in these shipments. So I think the global nature of the campaign, as you asked about, is really one of the things that I feel most inspired by. And I think, as a Palestinian, seeing that folks, people of conscience around the world, even in people who are not Arab, are not, don't have connections to the region that have been destroyed by Zionism or embattled by Zionism, folks around the world have, taken a stand for Palestine, have taken a stand against Maersk, really see like the clear morality in this issue. And I think that's how we win, is by building those connections worldwide.
I'm curious if you can talk a bit about what's been successful here in terms of tactics, because I think what people have really struggled with during this horrific and ongoing genocide is they start to feel a little bit helpless, like nothing's working. I'm going to protest. I'm calling my senators. I'm like doing everything I can. I'm writing letters. I'm talking to my neighbors. I'm going to meetings. And it just like the genocide still, carries on. And it can feel very demoralizing. But you guys have succeeded in something so important. So yeah, can you talk a bit about the tactics involved here? You've got, it's not just one thing that you're doing. You're working with several different groups and organizing this way and that way. And yeah, tell me what that means in practice.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, Rania, because to be real, we are absolutely seeing that burnout, that disillusionment. Hope is a flame that we have to keep alive. And as Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're out organized. And so the task really is for us to get organized and be invested in the sort of long-term revolutionary struggle that we're going to need to finally, rid ourselves of the chains of Zionism and imperialism. And to do that, we have to invest in a myriad of strategies and tactics to isolate Zionism. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just about the settlements. It's not even just about, Palestine. It's about this entire imperialist system. And so in order to be tackling something that large, we have to be, mass in our movement and also patient in our strategies, while also exploring a range of options. So just to make that concrete, in this particular development, when it comes to the settlements, complicity with the settlements that Maersk recently retracted, we pursued strategies involving legal reports and advocacy in the UN. We pursued more direct action with some of our comrades that were sitting in or protesting outside of Maersk headquarters. There were folks who disrupted the actual docks where Maersk was sending shipments. And then there were also, the teach-ins, the mass protests, the canvassing and flyering, and really that entire range of tools in our toolbox as organizers is what we need to finally confront these monsters of imperialism. Because what we're after here is isolating Zionism, and in order to isolate Zionism, we need to really hit them where it hurts, target the companies that are allowing them to facilitate the flow of weapons, the flow of goods, that keep the entity maintaining their genocide. And that's long work, and it requires us to get creative, but to rely on one another ultimately. So I would say it's a mix of the mass actions, the political education, but also the direct confrontation of Maersk wherever it is.
Well, as you said, Leah, there's more work to be done, and I assume there are some people watching this right now who might be wondering how they can get involved in the Mask Off Maersk campaign. What would you advise them to do?
Yeah, so you can follow us and stay updated with the campaign at Mask Off Maersk. We have a website. We also have an Instagram. If you know that Maersk is in your city, you can reach out to us, and details on how to do that are located on both the Instagram and the website. We need folks to get involved in this campaign, and really we need folks to take up the strategy of a people's arms embargo. It may start with Maersk, but it needs to expand to the whole system that's upholding Zionism. So, I always joke, evict your local war war profiteer. I think that's how we need to start thinking as a movement. And we hope that folks continue to stay updated to the campaign, plug in, and think about what you can do in your local organizing to evict your local war profiteers.
Right on. Lea Kayali, an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement and the Maerk Off Maersk campaign, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
Rania?
I mean, it's so incredible what they have managed to accomplish, and I think they are really this particular campaign against Maersk is really something that should be emulated, because it's demonstrated to be successful, and also it's informing and getting people on board in different spaces that you otherwise wouldn't think to be organizing with or speaking to. So like dock workers, for example. So anyways, great, very, very, very proud of what PYM has accomplished here.
Yeah, no, fantastic move on many different levels. Obviously, a long history with the movement against apartheid in South Africa of these types of campaigns playing really big roles. And of course, it's big corporations that basically run the planet. So if you really start hitting their pocketbooks, it can make a big impact. Starbucks just fired their most recent past CEO, and the reason I'm saying that is there are a lot of reasons why they fired him. But they started losing revenue because people were boycotting Starbucks. And in this guy's last earnings call at the end of the year in 2024, he actually had to admit to the shareholders that they were losing not insignificant amounts of revenue around the world to people who were boycotting Starbucks, because of it. And I think that, it just shows the impact that these kind of things can have. It, changing companies' policies, getting them to dump their CEOs, all these different pieces. I mean, it has a big impact.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick before we move on to our next guest with regard to Starbucks, there's a coffee shop that opened up very quickly after October 7th, after the genocide started, in Beirut called Stories. And it literally looks exactly like Starbucks, like even the colors of the logo, the way Stories is written. I pass by it often when I walk on near the sea, and I always peek in because it looks exactly like Starbucks. And basically they took all this business away from Starbucks. They were like, hey, if you like Starbucks, just come here. Same thing, but not Starbucks.
Yeah.
And so one of the Starbucks that was built next to actually ended up going out of business. So all that's, and it's Lebanese owned. It's owned by a Lebanese family, a Lebanese businessman from the South. But all that's to say, I mean, yeah, ultimately this stuff can matter.
Yeah. There was actually a very good article in Middle East Eye, this is maybe a year ago now, or not a year ago, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, about Oman, how Carrefour, the big French supermarket company, is losing all this business to this UAE company that brings all the stuff from China and different parts of Asia, and it's a lot cheaper, but that people just won't, they won't shop there at all. I read a really interesting one in South China Morning Post about it, and it opened with a woman in Indonesia who has one of those apps about boycotting, and how she just is going through every single thing and just double checking, triple checking. So the point of both articles was that these are things that once people learn the brands, they're not going to shift back. And so they actually are sort of long-term shifts away from a lot of the hegemony of Western brands over global South consumers, because they are not wanting to contribute to the apartheid and the genocide in Israel. So, a very interesting and important form of protest happening around the world below the headlines. And of course, not as much here in the West, but with the Maerk Off Maersk campaign, I think we're seeing a lot of success. So we're going to keep the movement moving on here. Obviously, a lot of elements still flowing from what we have seen with the U.S. Israel versus Iran issue. And we are very, very happy to be joined here on the show by Sina Toossi, who's a senior non-resident fellow at the Center for International Policy. Sina, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you here. And I guess my first question is, I'd like you to maybe talk to us about the claim being made by, President Trump that his bombing was a great victory for peace, and that he, of course, has set the stage now for everything in the region to start moving in a positive direction, and, is really sort of the great peacemaker now and will resolve all issues with Iran and perhaps elsewhere.
Yeah, so really for the past several decades, especially in the post 9/11 era, the U.S. and Israel, really the U.S. at the behest of Israel, have been trying to transform the Middle East to make it more safe and secure for Israel over the long term, to change the geopolitical landscape for this new century of American dominance and hegemony. Like if you read the letters by Project for a New American Century before 9/11, this was very clearly enunciated in their goals. And this is, all those people staff the Bush administration. So now I really view this war as a last-ditch desperate attempt, in light of October 7th and everything that's been happening to, Iran was always the main goal, the ultimate goal, to take that out and reshape the strategic landscape. But, I think we can really strongly say that they did not achieve these strategic goals. They had a lot of tactical successes. Their opening surprise attack took out top Iranian military commanders. But Netanyahu explicitly said their main goal is to destroy Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities. They clearly tried to spur regime change as well and destabilize the country. They bombed police stations, they bombed media stations, they bombed, all kinds of infrastructure to kind of instigate chaos. But, we saw Iran was firing missiles at Israel in a very effective way right up until the ceasefire. Steve Bannon said that that contributed to the ceasefire to save Israel. They were also running low on their very expensive interceptors. Trump himself acknowledged the damage Iran did. And, this nuclear program, how much it's been set back is very much in debate. We have both European and American intelligence assessments that have been leaked that say that, Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium and its advanced centrifuges are basically untouched. They've been moved. The damage at Fordo is unclear, and Iran has other, now Iran basically their nuclear program is much more ambiguous and non-transparent, which is actually more advantageous in many ways for Iran.
It's, let's talk a bit about that because I think it's interesting to, now that we can sit back and like kind of reflect on this 12-day war, you had the Israelis coming out, hard and making these wild statements about their goals. And they weren't vague. I mean, the goals were destroy Iran's nuclear program. And essentially the goal became regime change, right? And we look at the end of this and they didn't get either of those things. So I'm just curious how you assess winners and losers here. And I don't want to say Iran necessarily won because Iran was horribly bombed, but actually let's look at what was the goal and was it accomplished?
Exactly. Yeah, I think, it helps to really just detail their strategic goals and Iran's strategic goals overall. Their strategic goal, I think Israel's strategic goal in the modern era has been to basically get the US into the region, drag the US to fight wars on its behalf as it pursues this expansionist policy, tries to consolidate this apartheid genocidal system in Israel. And, Israel strongly has opposed US-Iran negotiations. I would argue, based on the worry that America would leave the region or diminish its presence in the region, come to some kind of broader settlement with Iran, and Israel would be left more vulnerable, wouldn't have as much of a free hand. And so, I think that played into Israel's opposition to the Obama era nuclear deal. That's played into their opposition to the talks Trump had. Now, Trump, it seems like, there's different schools of thought whether, Trump's negotiations with Iran these past several months were all a strategic ruse or not, or Netanyahu kind of played him and then Trump rolled with it because the opening salvo was so effective. Regardless, the outcome is that Iran's nuclear program is not destroyed, the way they're trying to portray it as. Trump, they need the political win. Netanyahu needs the political win. But as we see these assessments, as the picture gets clearer, the most critical aspects of the program, again, the enriched uranium and advanced centrifuges are intact. Iran's missile program was not destroyed. They showed their capabilities, and I'm sure they're going to double down on investing in those capabilities. And the broader strategic picture is that, America, I think when push came to shove, Trump wrapped up the war. As soon as America was getting drawn into this, American bases, the stability of these Persian Gulf allies of America was questioned. They pulled out, and I think this could, they're going to try to capitalize on this. We'll see, with the Gaza, with what's going on in Gaza and whatnot. But I think the broader strategic outcome could be, we'll see how it plays out, that if America, comes, is again pursuing negotiations with Iran, seeks some kind of settlement, doesn't want to get involved in a war, pushes Israel to end the war in Gaza because of its own consequences for America's own strategic interests for this kind of ruling elite in America. And that could end up putting Israel in a strategically more weaker position, especially given that Iran's nuclear program is not destroyed, and especially given that they basically have this nuclear ambiguity right now, not unlike Israel's nuclear program.
You know, I feel one of the aspects of this, and certainly the lead up and the way that this was, justified by the Trump administration, by Israel and others, is that, somehow Iran doesn't want to negotiate, that the negotiations are just a ruse. I mean, despite the fact that we already had a deal, despite the fact that there have been a lot of negotiations, that, you can't really negotiate with Iran. And I wonder how you evaluate that, because that feels like an important sort of almost implied reality, especially in the US media, about how this is discussed, which, at least to me, doesn't really seem to be borne out by what has taken place over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think, that narrative is really testament to, the lopsided nature of not just power in the current international system, which is changing, but also the information war, and that's why it's so important what you guys are doing. Like this media land, is the media hegemony is what needs to be challenged and changed. But yeah, so I mean, the idea that Iran was not at the negotiating table or has not been a sincere negotiator in the past is blatantly false. That the opposite is actually true. That, America was the one under Trump who left the previous nuclear deal. That these Iran and Trump just were in the midst of negotiations, spurred on by Trump, who positioned himself as an anti-war candidate, who consistently said he was adamant about getting a deal with Iran. He wrote a letter to Iran's supreme leader Khamenei in March, basically begging for negotiations. I mean, apparently, according to US sources, it was very respectful. It was even talking about respecting Iran's nuclear infrastructure and all that, like the Iranian bottom line. And they had 5 rounds of negotiations. After each round, both US and Iranian negotiators were kind of upbeat. They said they were forward-leaning. And then there was a 6th round scheduled last Sunday. And it seemed like they might actually reach a preliminary kind of interim deal, like a framework deal based on principles. And then Israel launches the attack. It seemed like Israel went to Trump, told them a narrative that, we have this all prepared. We're going to take him out. It's going to be easy. This is going to help you get Iranian capitulation. We're going to spur, even regime change potentially. Trump did give some kind of green light. They said you gave the 60-day deadline, which is unclear when that even started. This is going to make you look tough, blah, blah, blah. And Trump seemingly bought that, rolled with it. That Friday morning, he was very upbeat. He said it was excellent. And then he went silent for a couple of days, and then his tune changed. The second Iranian missile strikes came, the second the Iranian public rallied around the defense of their country, there was no signs of any kind of turmoil, unrest, regime change developments. And it was clear that this was going to become a quagmire. And, they went into crisis mode and ended it in 12 days. And it's unclear what conditions there were for ending it, because Trump said at NATO that China can now buy Iranian oil. That's huge. I mean, China's been explicitly sanctioned for buying Iranian oil. Was that a condition of ending the war from the Iranians? Or Trump said that at the NATO summit that because of the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, great progress was being made on ending the Gaza war. Was that an Iranian condition? Again, I'm not saying it was, but interesting that he's saying that. And now, again, they're pursuing negotiations. CNN just reported that they're offering Iran massive sanctions relief, $30 billion of their frozen assets, other stuff. And in a context where the US claims Iran's nuclear infrastructure is destroyed, Iran is expelling IAEA inspectors and saying, just going totally kind of in this ambiguous, silent direction, non-transparent direction with the nuclear program. And if the US is now pursuing negotiations to lift sanctions, that changes the strategic picture, I would argue, more in favor of Iran than vice versa.
Sina, I want to ask you a bit about the Iranian diaspora, because I know that NIAC just put out this poll of some Iranian American views that are quite interesting. And I say that also because, I watch a lot of CNN, especially because I hate myself. And especially the last couple of weeks, I was kind of like flipping through the different mainstream channels like a crazy person, just watching how they were covering it. And it was always, there were some good people on, I'll give it that. Like you had the Valley Nasser types, and I mean, he's got good analysis and he's very realistic. But you also had people like Kareem Sajidpour, who is at the Carnegie. He's their a chief Iran analyst. And I mean, I think I just saw him like earlier today on CNN saying that basically like the Iranian regime is so weak and, you know, is like basically like could collapse like that. I thought it was kind of funny. He was talking about the supreme leader being really old, like that's like unique to Iran. And I'm just kind of like, our president is 79, but okay. Anyway, all that's to say, if you watch a lot of mainstream media, you do get this view that like, not necessarily that most Iranian Americans like support the destruction of Iran with Israeli bombs, not necessarily that, but that like a lot of Iranian Americans would actually be pretty happy if the U.S. got its way in Iran. So I'm curious if you could talk a bit about what actually the Iranian American attitude is when it comes to this sort of stuff. And I also want to note that this is happening as we're watching Iranian immigrants in the U.S. like get swept up and basically detained by ICE for no reason other than being Iranian.
Yeah, I think, the context is important when trying to measure sentiment of Iranian Americans or Iranians in Iran. One context is that, for over 4 decades, on top of the various regime change efforts that the US and its allies have undertaken against Iran, there's been an all-out media war, an empire of propaganda. It's very understudied, like how many media stations and media outlets and websites and well-funded news stations there are targeting the Iranian population in Farsi to basically gaslight people. I mean, we talked about the Russian in this country, it was talked about the Russian disinformation campaigns that's people blamed for people voting for Trump. Okay, that they were misled, whatever. But we're talking about disinformation campaigns. The disinformation campaigns targeting Iranians is unprecedented in modern times. So whatever sentiment has been generated in that regard, I would argue is largely in the regard of supporting attacks on Iran from some Iranians in the diaspora is more an outcome of these disinformation campaigns. But what this war, I think, proved once and for all, and I think people like Karim Sajidpour further discredit themselves by pushing this narrative of like, oh, it just takes another small push. Like they just did a massive push and nothing happened. So what do you want? He knows really nothing about the situation in Iran. He's another one of these kind of very shallow Iran analysts in DC that just perpetuate what the hawks want to hear. And he adds the Iranian face to this destructive agenda, which these people need as well. But yeah, I mean, in general, when the reality came and bombs started dropping and Iranian kids started dying, that the vast majority of the Iranian public and the diaspora are obviously opposed to that. Regardless of whatever, legitimate qualms they have with their government and the Islamic Republic and whatnot, that we saw, and I was even struck by how much of a rally around the nation there was and rally around the defense of Iran. And, from secular to religious, from women who wear the hijab, who don't wear the hijab, from Gen Z, from across the board, so you have this whole kind of cottage industry, well-funded echo chamber of these people who've been propped up. And it's like you have a minority of people, they give them the biggest loudspeaker in the world, they give them Iran International that ran a $500 million budget deficit in the past couple of years, and then you make these people seem like they're the people of Iran. And then but it's like it's this cycle of propaganda, and they're fooling, like the American and Israeli decision makers are fooling themselves because they created a cycle of propaganda, of this propaganda machine that told them what they want to hear. Apparently, based on their own propaganda, they made these foolish decisions to like, oh, the people are going to rise up. This is going to be easy, one final push. And then they were embarrassed. Nothing happened. They had to pull back. And so if they continue to believe their own propaganda, they're shooting themselves in the foot. It's self-defeating.
Well, we appreciate you helping us sort through all of this. Sina Toossi, Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Center for International Policy. Thanks so much for joining us here in the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Rania?
Yeah, I mean, Eugene, I'm glad that we got to debunk that at the end there, because I gotta say the amount of voices I have Christiane Amanpour, like why do I do
Christiane
this to
Amanpour,
myself?
who I hate to say it, this I don't even know. I think I can say this though, whose entire sort of popularity is because she has a good accent. Americans, when they hear someone with that
That's
kind of like
true.
British accent, they just immediately think that it's like it's like
Posh
high
British.
cerebral something.
Yeah.
But it's like, what? Like, I mean, yeah, anyway, although she's not even the worst. The worst to me is Margaret Brennan from CBS. And I'm mainly saying that because the commercial for her show, which is like, we're hitting all the important issues, the only image they have from the Palestine, occupied Palestine, is her like running into some sort of like shelter in Israel when there's it's so tone deaf on so many different levels. It also faced the
It's
nation.
it's not as bad as the image that CNN uses of Clarissa Ward, like staging her like hiding when there's nothing happening around her.
Yes. And then you have Jake Tapper, who keeps saying they're striking the Iranian nuclear weapons program. What Iranian nuclear weapons program? The whole issue is that they don't have one. I mean, even the way the U.S. talks about it and the Israelis talk about it, they say, there's breakout capacity. Well, if they have breakout capacity but haven't yet used it, then the concept is that they have not broken out, i.e. have not tried to build a nuclear weapon. Like, it's sleight of hand, but it's also a very important aspect of how these things go, because it's like one little sentence, like the Iranian nuclear weapons program, and like you don't really necessarily think that much about it. But if you repeat it over and over and over again, then people's thought process, even if they're like against the strikes, is still that the strikes are against a nuclear weapons program that's aimed at Israel. And so that's a very loaded framing. And of course, Jake Tapper has a reason for doing it, because he supports Israel and is against these countries that are against Israel. And he's used his bully pulpit at CNN for the entire genocide to push a lopsided narrative, and that's clear. Don't sue me, Jake, I guess, but if you do, I'm happy to prove it in court.
He's litigious.
But it's crazy. Well, you want to talk about, let's talk about something that broke through the media lies and spin. That's the Zohran Mamdani mayoral campaign, the socialist who is a supporter of Palestine and also an immigrant to this country at a time of great anti-immigrant bigotry, who is heavily targeted by the mainstream media, heavily on Palestine. You would have thought that he was running to be the mayor of Tel Aviv or something, the way they were talking to him in a lot of these debates. But nonetheless, he did win resoundingly against Andrew Cuomo, one of the biggest names from one of the biggest families in New York politics. Rania,
Also
your
a
thoughts?
sexual predator.
Yes.
A sexual predator. Which I was like, I remember when I saw Cuomo was running, I was like, didn't he like resign in shame and like corruption or something? And I was like, oh wait, it was like a sexual assault thing. How does this guy have like 20 lives? But anyway, I think this is fantastic. That he won. I think it says so much, given that like the entire media and money interests were stacked against him. And everyone thinks New York City is this like progressive paradise, but it's full of a lot of like rabid right-wingers who call themselves Democrats. It also has Wall Street. Yes, it's a Democrat majority city. A lot of cities are majority Democrat, but I get the sense, Eugene, this is going to sound very cartoonish, but this is just how it seems, that a lot of US cities are kind of run by these like right-wing Democratic mayors who act like mob bosses. And that are in bed with like real estate developers who are also kind of like mob bosses and probably in bed with actual mob bosses. I mean, let's be honest. So to have somebody like who's calling themselves a democratic socialist, who's calling it a genocide in Gaza, who's also got, great economic policies in a place like New York that's just, built for the rich, and is like completely unaffordable for the average person. It's so fantastic. And I gotta say, a few months ago, I had friends here in Lebanon being like, who is this guy? He seems really cool. I was like, oh, so cute that he like is running. But like, I saw it as so cute that he's running because I didn't think there was a chance in hell. And I'm so happy to be proven wrong that he won this primary. And what I think is so incredible was, to see the racist backlash because he's Muslim. And I don't actually know if he's Shia Muslim. It doesn't really matter. But a lot of Zionists are really upset and are saying that means that he's basically Iran, because they're so racist. So So also, like, there was all these comments by like crazy rabid Islamophobes just being like, 20 years ago, Muslims committed 9/11, and now one might be the mayor of New York. And I was just like, what? It's just like the most insane stuff. But also, what's more interesting, besides that sort of predictable right-wing insanity, is the fact that you have centrist Democrats who are freaking out and already trying to figure out how they're going to scheme with the right to basically beat him in the general election in November.
No, I think that's right. And if he does win the general election in November, which he has a very good chance to do, they'll do everything possible to kneecap him as mayor so that he won't be able to carry out much of what he is saying he'll carry out, in the hopes that people will then blame him and say, oh, well, he talks a good game and these socialists come into politics and they say they're going to do all this and it never really works out. And, no disrespect to Zohran, who I think will, if he wins, do his best. I'm sure he doesn't seem like a liar to me, to put these policies in. This is the problem with capitalist politics, is that it really is not possible to do all these good things, not because they're not possible, but because ultimately the system is set up to prevent people from making very significant change within the system. And I think it's a good opportunity for us to think more about that. But I do want to say something directly here, and I'd like to address former Secretary of the Treasury, former president of Harvard University, Larry Summers, who put out a tweet this morning attacking Zohran Mamdani for Trotskyite economic policies. And he said that this is very dangerous for the Democrats. And Larry Summers, who is a cipher for the richest, elite, worst interest, really, when it comes to capitalists in this country and in this planet, is expressing a view that many have expressed, that somehow what Zohran is promoting, freezing the rents, promoting better public transportation, improving healthcare, improving schools, improving childcare, making the city more affordable and more livable, even using public dollars to support food security so that just grocery stores can't price gouge people, that these things are somehow impossible. And that somehow it's crazy to think that this could happen, that it's economically irresponsible in order to promote these things. Well, I just want to note a few facts here. One is that the city of New York has a GDP of $1.3 trillion. $1.3 trillion is the GDP of New York City. It's the home to many of the largest Fortune 500 companies. It's the home to many of the most richest billionaires on earth. In fact, it's really the home to almost all of them, because these billionaires live in like 25 different cities. That being said, how is it you can have a $1.3 trillion GDP, but you can't have affordable housing? How is it you can have a $1.3 trillion GDP, but you can't do anything to protect people from extreme price gouging? How is it that you can have a $1.3 trillion GDP? Some of that, by the way, is the money that landlords are making from price gouging people who can't afford it, and you can't freeze the rents in one of the cities with the most astronomical highest rents and low quality of living. People act like they're paying high rents for high quality buildings. You're paying high rents oftentimes for low quality buildings. Many of them are even in slum type conditions. You have many people, especially undocumented immigrants, who are often forced into illegally subdivided units and being charged outrageous amounts of money. But let's just go a little bit deeper here, because this is Larry Summers, who I want to address directly. Someone who, at the height of the inflation crisis of 2022, when working class people in this country, especially in New York City, were suffering massively from the artificial inflation that was created by corporations taking advantage of COVID. Let's remember the Economic Policy Institute study that outlined that over the course of 2020 to 2022, 30 cents to 50 cents of every dollar of inflation was going to corporate profits. A false manufactured crisis. Larry Summers wanted the Federal Reserve to induce a recession in the country and, in his own words, increase unemployment substantially. So at the time of some of the worst cost of living crisis in this country, he wanted to put people out of their jobs, which means out of their homes, which means without the ability to provide food and other things for themselves and their families. That's who he is. Cornel West was right when he said that Larry Summers was the Ariel Sharon of higher education back in 2000. And he really is an economic terrorist. This is someone, in fact, Larry Summers, who engineered, by the way, the destruction of the Russian economy after the fall of the Soviet Union and selling the place for parts, along with Jeffrey Sachs, who I guess at least now is apologizing for it. But that was Larry Summers. And, I don't want him to sue me, but there are at least allegations that he personally benefited from that aspect that happened there. He was the secretary of the Treasury and a major economic advisor under the Clinton administration, along with Bob Rubin, who actually presided over the massive economic destruction of working class people here that we call neoliberalism. A time where you could see from 1979 to I believe it was 2020-ish, 2025, where productivity went up 86%, but wages only went up 32%. And what does that actually mean? What that actually means is, because what's productivity? You hear these things? What productivity is this. It means that when you go to work, the amount of money you generate in an hour of work goes up. That's productivity. So you're working the same amount of time, but you're generating more money. So productivity goes up 86%, hourly pay goes up 32%. So wait, what happened there? Where did that other money go? It was stolen from you by the bosses. It was stolen from you by the people who own the companies who don't actually do the work, who instead of actually paying you for what you did, the income that you generated, just stole it so that they have yachts and heated pools. And that's the type of economic system that Larry Summers wanted to run. And what did they do to try to hide that from people? They massively expanded the exploitation of workers in the global south in order to be able to lower the structural cost of goods so that people didn't notice how much of their own money was being stolen from them. That is Larry Summers. He is an economic terrorist. He is someone who wants to defend a system where you can have $1.3 trillion of GDP, where you can have $3 trillion of profits for U.S. corporations in 2024, $2 trillion of which was distributed in dividends. And almost all of the wealth in the stock market is owned by very, very rich people. So that's basically $2 trillion to trust fund kids and super wealthy CEOs. And that is what he considers to be realistic and good and moral and the way things should go. That is what he considers to be the right thing. And Zohran Mamdani, just for saying you should freeze the rents for working class people, is some sort of crazed, wild person. It's a complete and total farce and fabrication. Everything Zohran is saying could easily be done, easily be paid for. It just means that the rich would have to get the regular Olympic-sized pool, not the heated-sized Olympic-sized pool. But that's why they pay these people like Larry Summers, the think tanks in DC, all these so-called economic analysts on CNBC like Larry Kramer and other people to tell you that that truth is somehow something different. Do not believe the hype. There is no doubt at all that the Mamdani campaign was well within the range of the politics of the possible, but he's hurting the pocketbooks of the Wall Street bankers, the real estate interests, the developers, the construction companies, and all the other vultures who have been destroying the people of New York, especially since COVID, under the aegis of people like Andrew Cuomo. And that's why Cuomo was defeated, because people haven't forgotten that.
Woo! Eugene, that was incredible. Very well said.
Thank you.
And I love the energy there. You're absolutely right. And you know, Larry Summers, if you're watching, you heard it here. You're a terrorist, an economic terrorist. It really is incredible, though, because the things that he's promoting, the majority of people do support. And it's amazing how they really tried to hit him with the Israel stuff over the socialist stuff, by the way. I'm sure the anti-socialist stuff will start to, you know, be a big part of the pushback against him, especially as these like Bill Ackman types come together with like the Michael Bloomberg types and the, you know, Andrew Cuomo types to try to defeat him, whether that comes in the form of everyone just backing Eric Adams or whether Andrew Cuomo ends up running as an independent. I've seen that floated around. And like you said, you know, if he does win, it would be incredible if he won. Think of like the way that regime change operations work in other parts of the world. They will do that to New York City. I mean, maybe they won't bomb New York City, but all the other things they will do to New York City. Could you imagine they're going to start announcing sanctions on New York City?
You're joking, but it's true. The first thing you're going to hear when he wins is all these Fortune 500 companies are going to talk about how they're now moving their headquarters to Connecticut and New Jersey.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
A lot that can be said about that, but tip of the cap to the voters themselves, by the way, because the reason he won is so many people went out and registered to vote for the first time in New York City and came out in significant numbers in ways that don't normally happen because no one votes usually in these elections because they're so uninspiring. But people rallied to someone who was talking about their real interests. Believe it or not, socialism, more popular than you think. Well, we are going to keep the movement moving forward here. Also, yesterday, June 25th, was the anniversary, 1 year anniversary of the massive Gen Z uprising in Kenya, of people also rising up against capitalist exploitation, inequality, police brutality, and political corruption. And there were also massive protests that swept the country again yesterday, especially in the main city of Nairobi. I mean, just massive, massive, massive crowds. And to talk more about what took place there and what's coming next, we are very, very happy to be joined in the show once again by Booker Amole, who is the General Secretary of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya. Booker, as always, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Thank you very much, Eugene. And it's a pleasure to be back to Breakthrough News, especially, at this interesting time when the Kenyan masses are experiencing acute imperialist crisis. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And it's an honor to have you here. And maybe let's just start there. I mean, what's the meaning of what took place yesterday? I mean, it was such a massive event. I mean, it seems to portend a very significant sort of level of discontent and willingness to fight amongst the broad masses there in Kenya.
Yesterday, we had a big social explosion in the street where millions of young people turned out in large numbers to commemorate the martyrs of last year's uprising. Remember, last year, on the same date, which was June 25th, the current government murdered 61 young people when they ran over parliament after a big anti-IMF, anti-World Bank campaign, which had drafted the Finance Bill 2025. So, and the state repression and police brutality has been on the rise. Remember, just in the run-up to this commemoration and celebration of the youth uprising, the martyrs, the state has been very lethal. In the essence, some of the young people that were, even just criticizing the state on the social media had been arrested and even murdered in jail. So yesterday's protest was actually a nationwide protest to actually bring a clear message to the current regime that they are not welcomed, that they have not been able to carry out the tasks that they set for themselves in the last elections, and that they have continued to implement an anti-people policy, particularly perfected by mainly the World Bank and IMF, to make sure that austerity measures are even more reinforced, to make sure that only anti-people rules, all the policies, government of the day. And yesterday, the Communist Party Marxist was also on the streets to make sure that, we direct the anger, consolidate our organization, and even to recruit more people into the organization. So it was a big a success for the people. The ruling class for the first time could not, engage through its violence to make sure that it suppressed the people, because they had murdered several youths just before this commemoration and even promised more violence against anybody who attempted to challenge this kind of, police brutality. So that is what was happening yesterday in the streets. The demonstrations will continue in the next couple of days, even couple of weeks, until, the state repression can be crushed. This is what the Kenyan population are determined to make sure that there is a counter power of the people, not just to keep check, but to currently challenge this neo-colonial entity, mainly the puppets of the United States imperialism that continues to manage their Kenyan affairs on behalf of the dominance class of the dominance class in the United States, and not in the interest of the majority of the Kenyan people, Eugene.
I'm curious if you can talk a bit more about some of that repression, because it's been quite brutal. I mean, we're talking about just shutting down entire TV stations, basically imposing a media blackout, firing live ammunition. What does that say about the nature of this particular government? And can you also maybe talk a bit about what it is that has pushed people to the brink? Because, you know, to be able to stand up to such a violent government, they have to have pushed you to be willing to really put yourself on the line.
First of all, it's important to acknowledge that the people who are going to the street are not just going to challenge a brutal government. The people are already in very extreme conditions where they live, and they cannot in any day live that miserable life without coming out to exercise their right to challenge the government that has condemned them in this extreme poverty. Sometimes the ruling class and a privileged few people want to indicate as if it is uh, the people just love to be on the streets to bring, anarchy, as President William Samoei Ruto and his supporters will want to portray. But the majority of the Kenyan people are living in very extreme poverty. And some 70% of the Kenyan population still live in the backwardness of the rural life. And the few people that lives in the cities, 30% of that population that lives in the cities, only about less than 1% live in what we call non-slum areas, while the other 29% actually lives in the informal poor neighborhoods in Nairobi. So to exercise their rights to come to the street and to make sure that they can confront the state brutality is much better than them staying home to die of hunger or curable diseases. This is what is inspiring the people. The people are going to the streets because of their daily realities, and the government of the day is incapable to actually solve the problems of the people, because capitalism, in actual sense, the indirect imperial rule that has imposed upon the Kenyan people, is unable to give people jobs with dignity. The indirect imperial rule that continues to sustain this neocolonial system is incapable to give people medicine. It's incapable to give people education. So for that reason, even the majority of the people now that goes to the street to demand this government to offer services, the message that the Communist Party Marxist continues to insist on is that the only option available for the Kenyan people is to carry out their revolution to its conclusion, to make sure that they can complete their independence and declare Kenya a sovereign republic and start the immediate project of building the national economy, in the farmest ground to socialist construction. This is important for us to acknowledge. And as we have seen before, maybe it will shock the viewers, but the police, the extrajudicial police killings in Kenya is not something new. In fact, there is data to showcase that extrajudicial killing is one of the major ways in which the youth lose their lives in Nairobi, not even on the natural causes or other diseases, but the capitalist crisis in our country, the imperialist crisis in our country, has made life so extremely difficult for the majority of the people. There is a lot of young people that have been alienated from production. They cannot even access the dignity to have a job, to practice what they went to do in school. So this is the challenges that is facing this current regime, and the current regime do not know exactly what to do, because remember, almost the money that is being collected is being used to pay the illegitimate and the odious debt that still bodies like IMF and World Bank claim for Kenya to actually owes them. So at the end of the day, as long as the government remains a puppet government of the United States, they are incapable even to come up with decisive policies to challenge those that are imposed upon the Kenyan people by the United States hegemony. In that case, they are incapable to carry out any pro-people policy. And when we see people that are coming to the streets and there's a lot of chaos in Nairobi, it only means the desperation and the burning desire for the majority of the Kenyan people to live a life with dignity, and no amount of police killings or jails will stop the people from Kenya to fight, to expand this democratic space, and even for the fall of the entire neo-colonial system, and to breathe life to a new project, which we call the Sovereign Republic, the People's Republic of Kenya, which is, devoid of any indirect imperial rule that continues to run the affairs of Kenya only for a few people, the dominance class within the global north.
One of the things that I saw yesterday in the protest that I think really brings home, the point you're making of the role of Kenya being really a puppet in the sort of broader U.S.-led imperial system, is that the tear gas canisters, or at least a number of the tear gas canisters that were being deployed, at least appeared to be of Israeli origin, which just felt like it said a lot about the nature of the Kenyan government and its repressive apparatus, which of course to me also reminds me the fact that Kenya is frontline of the U.S. neo-colonial attempt at further occupying Haiti. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, because it seems like not just at home, but abroad, President Ruto is really holding himself out as someone that can be counted on to line up with the U.S. geopolitical agenda.
First, the Kenyan government, particularly the current administration, in both content and form, are always aligned to the dictates of the United States and their military outpost, which is the Zionist entity Israel. And it will not shock you, because Israel was able to build itself an image in the African continent as an invisible army, in the sense that the majority of the African dictators before last year's event and the current retaliatory, attacks by Iran, Israel had been able to sustain an image that they are the security experts in Africa. And they have gotten into certain military arrangement with not just the Kenyan government, but the majority of the Eastern African countries, with a view to embed the Kenyan military with the Zionist military and the United States military. And that also entails supply of equipment, supply of other materials like tear gas and other ways that you can repress people who are freely expressing themselves. This is what Israel is experienced for, to make sure that they can suppress any uprising of the Palestinian people that will want to just defend their right to statehood, right to land, and right to their dignity. So the Kenyan government has been able to take certain, examples from Israel to repress the Kenyan people, and other than that, to also use materials that they are procured from the Zionist entity to make sure that they could suppress the Kenyan uprising. No wonder each and every time we are facing elections, the Kenyan politicians pay homage to Israel. They go there to negotiate for arms, to finance their political project, to make sure that they can sustain the Zionist so-called invincible image. But fortunately now, Zionism cannot hide. The Israel image is totally tattered. The Israel army is not invincible anymore. The Iron Dome and the Third and David's Link has already failed. So the best of the American technology has, crumbled down in the face of us in the occupied Palestinian territory, in the so-called Israel. So this is a new realization of a country that has been able to build its image through deception and even through divide and rule. And now we can see themselves, exposing themselves. And before too long now, we have tear gas canisters written "Made in Israel." And we can see how our government is quite complicit with the genocide that is taking place. Because remember, President William Samoei Ruto, the imperialist puppet, came out to say that a white settler establishment like, Israel has a right to defend itself. This is total complicit, even when, the International Criminal Court, which our president was one time indicted of for instigating tribal violence in our country, now he actually supports one of the indictees of this court and brings it out clearly that Israel has a right to defend himself. Why would a land grabber has a right to defend the land he has actually stolen from the natives? It's incredible. So we know for a fact that there is interrelationship between the Zionist project and the governments in the African continent. But the majority of the African people that knows the pain of settler colonialism, that know the pain of land grabbing, that knows the pain of dispossession of the land, cannot forsake the project of the Palestinian people. In fact, we have seen a lot of solidarity in African continent to call out Netanyahu and his killers, that they are carrying out a genocide, and that the African continent remains shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Well, the Communist Party Marxist Kenya has been on the front lines, will continue to be on the front lines and pushing towards the National Democratic Revolution. Booker Omole, you are the General Secretary of the Communist Party Marxist. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Sure. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, we went around the world today, which is why I feel like, not to toot our own horn, but I'm going to do it. One thing that I really appreciate about our content here at Breakthrough News is we don't obsessively center the U.S. We remember there's an entire other world, and we let people from those parts of the world actually speak about what's happening in their part of the world.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And I had the opportunity to be at the Congress of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya. And I have to say, a very impressive group of young people who were very, very dedicated to changing their country for the better, and really very inspiring what's happening there. I mean, it's called the Gen Z Uprising because it's very young, but you have to sort of go and see in Kenya the unbelievable wealth that's created, but the unbelievable poverty people are pushed into. So I think we will have to continue to watch that, and we'll continue to watch everything. But from Kabul to Kenya to Kansas City, I'm going, wow, maybe 3Ks wasn't the way to go there. But nonetheless, it does show that we are going around the world in a lot of different ways. We are against that other one. But nonetheless, Ronnie, anything you want to leave people with here before we go?
I just want to remind people to please make sure you smash that like button.
Smash
it helps boost
like button.
It helps boost us in the algorithm. Bam, 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 bam. I love it. And also, if you appreciate our work here at Breakthrough News and all of the perspectives that we bring to you from progressives, leftists, anti-imperialists, movement organizers all around the world, consider supporting us materially by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. And most importantly, you'll be supporting independent media that doesn't lie you into war.
Indeed, indeed. Well, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Rania, on behalf of our whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.
Everything that gets in its way.